And furthermore, the objective standard must represent, in this case, for good and bad, pure goodness, right? In other words, in order to say something is evil, we have to have an objective standard that is good, right? It must be absolutely good. Otherwise, it couldn't serve as the final standard of what is good and evil, or good and bad. If the standard were absolutely good, if it wasn't that, if it was a mixture, let's say, of good and bad, then there would have to be some higher standard, right, by which we would have to judge that standard. Right, and so if we have an ultimate standard, an absolute standard, then it has to be, for instance, in this case, absolutely good. Can't be a mixture of good and bad. Otherwise, it would be something that, how do we know it's bad? Well, we'd have to judge it by something else, right? So it has to be an absolute standard. And so what he's getting at here, he tells us the upshot is that our objective value judgments take for granted that there's some absolute standard or measure of goodness by which everything else can be judged.
Right.
That's what he's getting at, and so that kind of what brings God into the picture here.
Right. And so here's the crucial question: which worldview makes sense of our objective value judgments? Which worldview is most consistent with our assumptions that some things are objectively good and other things are objectively bad? Things that are the standard is outside of mankind or the universe. As many philosophers have recognized, the naturalist worldview faces real difficulties in these areas, right?
Yeah, it's because if the universe came from nothing and it has no objective meaning or purpose, then what sense does it make to say that, some things in the universe are objectively good or objectively bad, right? If everything reduces to physical particles and forces, then what basis could there be for an objective value judgment, right? What sense does it make to say that, one arrangement, for instance, of physical particles is any better or worse than any other arrangement of physical particles, right?
Right.
If that was just the only thing that we had to look at, right?
Yeah. It's not like this other arrangement of particles. That's what you used to say. You're just then comparing a physical makeup or
That's right.
as a comparison and not even a standard.
Right.
So here's the basic problem for the naturalist, right? If we say that some aspects of the universe are objectively good, like butterflies, for example, chocolate, something like that, and other aspects are objectively bad, diseases, peanuts and ice cream,
Holocausts,
along those same lines.
Yeah.
There must be some standard of goodness independent of the universe by which we're judging those different aspects of the universe. And that standard must be pure goodness. There must be that objectiveness. But according to the naturalists, nothing exists except for the universe, right? All that is there is what kind of nature gives us, and you can kind of cut it as saying, whatever does the most benefit or whatever adds to survival, and those things aren't mutually exclusive. But those still
benefit and who's survival,
right? And who's standard,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I bring in the old cliche for us presuppositionalists, but by what standard is it tends to be the key question here. So it's precisely this problem that, for the naturalists, that nothing exists except the universe, that this problem, which has led many naturalists to deny that our objective value judgments have a meaningful connection with reality.
Right. So especially this was really big in the early 20th century with the logical positivists and so forth. They argued, in fact, David Hume was one of the first ones to kind of put this together, not the first, but he argued that basically our value judgments are based on our emotions, right? It was called emotivism, right? It's what we like or dislike because there was no real objective standard outside of our own personal preferences.
Right. Yeah. So you could have a standard of, I think whatever's most stable for society is good. And so upending slavery would be bad because that would do the most harm to society as a whole. Right. It would upend it. Yeah, it might benefit a few million people. It might drive labor costs through the roof, but then find an equilibrium. It might add to innovation, but that's all. I mean, you're throwing dice in the dark in that period. Yeah. So no to slavery because the highest good is what's best for society.
Yeah. All right. So by whose standard, right? And we're back to that, right?
Right.
So it should be fairly clear that the Christian worldview doesn't face the same problem as having, no way to make these types of value judgments, right? No real ultimate standard. According to the Christian worldview, God is absolutely good, and God exists independently of the universe, right? So, there is indeed an absolute, ultimate, objective standard of goodness by which things then can be judged to be either good or bad, because God is that standard from the Christian worldview perspective, right? So, in short, if something is objectively good, then it reflects the character of God, and it conforms to the will of God. And if something is objectively bad, it is opposed to what is objectively good, which is God, his good character, and his will.
Which is almost what we see revealed in the Bible.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
By my own name I swear, because there's nothing higher. Come, let us reason together, because God is a reasoning God. Here's my standard to do this. You fall out of favor, you a drunkard, or in debt or in trouble. And so following God's ways is his standard. Because we live in a fallen world, it doesn't get you out of all the trappings of life, but it's following in what the creator of the universe has created us to be. And so it's like following a train track. Right. If we're staying on the train track, then we're doing what we're supposed to be. We're getting progression down to our final destination. And then to veer off would be to go our own way, and the train is doing what it's not designed to do.
That's right. And so oftentimes that's the argument people I've heard use why we should be obedient to God, right? It's kind of like the train saying, I want freedom, get me off of this track.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. The train is made for the track, right? And we're made for obedience to God. And so if we try to get off the track, we will become useless, meaningless, and worthless, and purposeless, and all those types of things, right? So the Christian worldview makes sense of the objective value judgments that we make as a matter of routine, right? Including our assumption that such judgments are actually grounded in reality rather than grounded in fiction or our own preferences.
Right.
And that sort of thing, right?
Here's a smart person. I follow after that smart person. Oh, okay. Well, that's just a person you prefer, which is a personal preference. If suddenly that person said something extremely opposite of what you find of value, you might disavow that person. So if that person that really isn't your standard, you're that standard.
Yeah.
So there's where the autonomy and theonomy comes into play there.